Commission statement on the rule of law in Romania. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Jourová again on behalf of the Commission.
Madam President, honourable members, the Commission has made very clear to this European Parliament and beyond that it is following very closely and with great concern developments concerning the rule of law in Romania. We have repeatedly said that Romania needs to put the reform process back on track and to do it urgently. This means going forwards, not backwards, and abstaining from any steps which reverse the progress accomplished over the past years. The Commission, and in particular the First Vice President Frans Timmermans, has personally engaged with Prime Minister Dăncilă, and the respective experts have met on several occasions for constructive discussions and dialogue. The Commission always made clear that talking for the sake of talking will not be enough, and concrete actions from the Romanian side will be needed sooner rather than later. The College discussed the situation 2 weeks ago. Regrettably, we have not yet been able to conclude that Romania is back on the right track. If our concerns are not met, the Commission will have to act and use the means at its disposal. Today's discussion is not about technical issues or to update you that on the backdrop of already clear backtracking identified in November, progress on the CVM recommendations has been stalled, or to discuss that the latest Romanian legislative developments transposing a number of EU directives could raise concerns about potential incompatibility with the EU law, or to mention further eroding confidence through recent executive ordinances and controversial appointment procedures. The situation around the nomination procedure for the next European Public Prosecutor's Office chief has also not contributed. Today's discussion is about very real risks of further steps backwards in Romania regarding the rule of law, and more specifically as regards the independence of the judiciary and the fight against corruption. First, the possible amendments of Criminal Code and Criminal Procedure Code. Such fundamental issues need careful preparation, widespread consultation of the magistracy and stakeholders, and a very clear understanding of the consequences of change. Any action taken should be compatible with EU law and international obligations, as well as CVM recommendations such as the fight against corruption. The Romanian authorities would be taking a risk in moving ahead without such a process, and this might lead to creating a systemic, de facto impunity for high office holders who were sentenced for corruption. Second, regarding the High Court of Cassation and Justice and a possible follow-up to a Constitutional Court judgment that has required changes to the composition of panels of 5 judges. There are serious questions about what is needed for the follow-up, and these cannot be separated from the potential consequences of reopening past cases, something which in itself could amount to a massive interference in the independence of the judiciary. The risk of massive disruption to the Romanian criminal justice system, including many corruption cases, cannot be ignored. Third, the issue of appointments of prosecutors, and in particular the need for a robust and independent system of appointing top prosecutors. This is not a new issue, but the checks and balances have been successively watered down. The result is highly controversial procedures to appoint top prosecutors, the Prosecutor General and the Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor. Fourth, the special prosecution section set up to investigate magistrates. Concerns about this structure had previously been raised in the CVM report by the Venice Commission and by the anti-corruption body GRECO. Yet, the government is reinforcing this structure. All these elements, all of them, raise major concerns taken separately. Together, they start to amount to a very worrying pattern. Recent months have been characterised by a very volatile situation in Romania, with a series of rushed decisions being taken on essential matters. If these concerns are not met, the Commission will have to act and use all the means at its disposal. The Commission therefore urges Romania to take time to consult, getting as close as possible to a consensus and drawing on advice from the Venice Commission as well as from the CVM process. It is not too late for Romania to revert to the path of the reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nagyon köszönjük. Grace.
Thank you. And now Ms. Ingeborg Gressler for 2 minutes from the EPP.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately I can't greet the Council Presidency because it would be very good for the Council Presidency to be present to hear all of this. Romania is in charge of the European Union, the head of the Council Presidency, and I think indeed they should be here because we haven't had this downward spiral as far as a rule of law in any other country in the European Union. And I hope that the Romanians, that this will be a single case. It would be good if the S&D had acted earlier and more decisively on this. Now, we call for an Article 7 procedure to be initiated to the blocking of funds as well, because we're seeing the collapse of rule of law. And I think indeed a government has to be responsible for what is going on in these particular situations. And the Council Presidency as well should be here to hear all of this. They are what falls victim, first of all, is independent justice. We see corruption. We see a socialist government which has been involved very clearly and implicated in numerous different cases of fraud. And I think indeed the S&D ought to be aware of this particular problem and bring it up as well. We see a constitutional court which, with its hands tied, and we see the appeals processes which are constantly being bogged down, and we see numerous different procedures simply blocked and impeded. And so I think now with regard to the candidates for the European Public Prosecutor's Office, unfortunately the Council has done very, very little on this particular front to deal with this very serious issue, to sanction what is taking place. There is clear responsibility that is shared now, of course, by the Council on this particular front. So I do think that this is totally unacceptable, what is going on right now. And the French candidate, unfortunately the way it's working out, it's like hiding simply behind different placing a fig leaf over certain very, very serious issues. So indeed I think the moment has come for us to move forward on this particular front. This involves the credibility of Europe having a clear process as far as the election of the European Public Prosecutor.
Thank you.
Indeed, we do have a blue card, Madam Gressler.
Thank you for accepting this intervention, and I shall ask the following question in English so you can use the interpretation system. Doamna Gressler, dumneavoastră în...
Mrs. Gressler, in your intervention you said some very strong criticisms about the Constitutional Court in Romania. I would like to ask you whether you can explain to my Romanians that members of the Constitutional Court in your country can be party members. Thank you.
Lieber Kollege, danke für die Frage.
Thank you very much for the question. I didn't say that I didn't say anything to that particular effect. But I simply wanted to say that it's important to defend the Constitutional Court because it's under serious pressure right now. And furthermore, I'd like to say that it's right now the time has come for the Socialist Group to take a position on this particular issue. And why do they simply disappear on this particular front when it involves a Romanian issue? We have numerous different fronts for the Court of Auditors. There has to be clarity with regard to where the funds are going from the European Union. And I think it's quite clear that the S&D group has to adopt a very, very clear position on these particular issues and not simply leave the room when it concerns Romania.
Thank you very much.
Igen, na, bocsássanak meg.
Sorry, I apologize. We continue the debate. For 1.5 minutes, Josef Weidenhauser from the Socialist Group. The floor is yours.
I would note that the President is in charge of the sitting, not Mr. Preda. Unlike the previous speaker, I think that the Romanian presidency has achieved a lot in the available time, despite many fears. And you could listen to me, Mr. Preda, please. A little bit of discipline would be good. So it's all the more strange that we're having this urgent debate. We're not discussing this thing for the first time. In November, the Parliament made it clear in a resolution that an overhaul of the systems in Romania shouldn't affect the independence of the judiciary. Checks and balances must be achieved, and parliamentary control of intelligence services must be strengthened. Unfortunately, our calls have not been recognised. That's regrettable. It's not against Romania. It's about our common understanding of the law. The functioning rule of law is a pillar of Europe, and this is anchored in the Copenhagen criteria. Insisting on maintaining these is not interfering in the internal affairs of a member state. It's in the interest of all of us. It shouldn't be one-sided, and we shouldn't be talking down, but common principles of the rule of law must be anchored in dialogue. That's our message towards Bucharest. That's the only way that East and West will grow together.
Thank you very much. And now, Monica Macovei from the ECR. The floor is yours.
Thank you. In Romania, a group of corrupt politicians, and they're led by Mr. Dragnea, who has been sentenced and is facing the court again, are having the court hearing postponed. They're not respecting the law. They're changing the laws. They're subordinating judges and prosecutors to politics. They're turning investment money into election bribes. They're destroying the heart of democracy because they're corrupt politicians escaping justice. 20 million people's fates are hanging on this. Is it save yourself time? We've been downtrodden, and we've seen tear gas grenades fired at us and plastic bullets. Our road is a European road. We witness the collapse of the country with despair. Tăriceanu and Dragnea, we watch on. They are just a few people clinging to the levers of power. And under the appearance of democracy, Romania today is slipping into a criminal dictatorship. 4 million Romanians have left the country, and not recently either. our break with Europe is a nightmare because we have lived on the margins throughout our history, and this is the last train that we can take. We want to go into Europe.
Thank
you, Madam. Sophie Nettefeld has the floor for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Commissioner. I have to start by saying that I share the irritation of Mrs. Gressle about the absence of the Council, not least because it is the country concerned. But I would also, well, you know, hold your applause until I finish, because you may not be so happy anymore. But I also regret the absence of Mr. Timmermans, who is and you know, no offence, Madam Commissioner, but he is the Commissioner and the Vice President in charge. And what has he done over the last 5 years? And just last week, the Commission has presented a kind of communication on the rule of law, which was, I mean, it was hardly worth the paper it was written on, and Mr. Timmermans didn't even bother to show up at the Libe Committee to present it. No, he left it to his civil servants. Where is he today? What has he done in the last 5 years? Because now I'm coming to the partisan issue. I am a bit tired of having debates here about, you know, today it's about Romania and it's the EPP criticising. Tomorrow it will be about Hungary, it's the socialists criticising, and the EPP is, well, not silent, because I know that some of you are indeed critical. I know Mrs. Gressle is very outspoken and very, very honest, and some other EPP members as well, but this is always turned into a partisan issue. It is not a partisan issue. This is about the values laid down in Article 2 of the treaties that concern us all, regardless of party political colour. And I don't understand. This House, 2.5 years ago, has adopted a position. It has adopted a proposal for a DRF pact, which is a general mechanism covering all the member states, all the governments. And the Commission, and again, I'm not pointing at you, Madam Commissioner, but Mr. Timmermans is responsible here. Mr. Timmermans said, oh, we don't need that because we've got all the tools in the toolbox that we need. Well, we don't. Now, Mr. Timmermans is a Spitzenkandidat, but Mr. Weber is also a Spitzenkandidat. So I would like to know from both Spitzenkandidaten, who are conspicuously absent, both as group leader and vice president of the Commission, you know, what they intend to do once they are president of the Commission. Will MEP Weber, no, sorry, will President of the Commission Weber do what he voted as MEP Weber, namely propose a fully fledged DRF mechanism applying equally to all the member states? And to be perfectly clear here, and I'm coming towards the end, my group, the ALDE group, has firmly taken its distance from the ALDE Romania party in government, because we are disappointed not just about the changes to the penal code, but also about their failure to support equal marriage or indeed civil partnership. We are very disappointed about the attitude of the Romanian government in the case of Mrs. Kövesi, and we're also very disappointed about their attempts to try and prevent the registration of new parties who want to run in the European elections. So, Madam Chair, I think we should insist on the DRF pact in the next period. Thank you.
Preda, are you accepting it? Parancsoljon, Mr. Preda.
Merci, Présidente. Tout à fait d'accord avec votre critique sur...
I completely agree with your criticism of the Commission and Mr. Timmermans. I don't want to be partisan here, but nonetheless, your leader, your group leader, Mr. Verhofstadt, said nothing hitherto on the situation in Romania. He's kept his silence. The drift didn't begin 3 months ago, and when we asked for you to do something, you stood on the sidelines, and I think you're doing an electoral calculation you yourself, madam. Tell me, why do you think Mr. Verhofstadt said nothing? Is it his personal friendship with Mr. Torriciano, or is it private interests that override the principles you mentioned? Tell me.
You've got it completely wrong. Just read the minutes of this House. The attitude of this group has been completely solid. If the EPP had been equally solid on Mr. Orban, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are in with Hungary. We have been very critical of what happens in Romania. We have, as I said, formally taken our distance from the ALDE party that is in government and asked the European ALDE party to expel them from our political family. We are very firm. We do this with a heavy heart because indeed there are many years of political friendship. But we stand by our principles, contrary to the EPP, who has still not taken its distance from Mr. Orban. And I recommend that you read the minutes of this House, because I personally took part, Mr. Preda, I took part in the debates on Romania, and I've been very critical. I've been very critical, Mr. Preda. I would beg you to be equally critical on your member, Mr. Orban.
Köszönjük szépen, Sargentini asszonynak adom meg.
Thank you, Ms. Sargentini has the floor. But before that, Mr. Bostinaru.
As it turned out, Mr. Bostinaru to Madam Intveld. Will you accept it?
Well, this is a party.
Mulțumesc. Doamna...
Thank you very much. Distinguished colleague, two very short questions for you. Do you know how many times the Romanian Constitutional Court labeled the actions of Mrs. Kövesi as being anti-constitutional? Do you know how many times she was found to be violating the Romanian Constitution? And then there is this case that you know of. There's the accusation of abuse of office. The most important testimonies comes from two prosecutors in the National Anti-Corruption Directorate. They are testifying against her. They are the lead witnesses. So how can you talk about political pressure in such a case?
I'm not going to enter into the details of court case, but to my knowledge, recently the court has judged that Mrs. Kövesi... Can I finish? Do you want to hear? Are you interested in the reply? Look, I've got 30 seconds and half of it is already gone, okay? What I do know, first of all, is that the court has already allowed Mrs. Kövesi to travel and to speak. The point is that the arguments I always hear against do not make the matter any better, because the image that we have here is of a complete mess. And what we need is the rule of law, not just for the European Union, but for the people in Romania, because young people are craving a country that is stable, that is where the government is reliable and clean, and all the stories saying, oh, you know, somebody is in the court and then there's the secret services interfering. Do you really think that that makes it better? I don't think so.
Thank you very much. We're going on with the debate. Ms. Sargentini is the next speaker from the Greens.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, rule of law is not left-wing or right-wing, and it's very painful to see here that the Romanian government is backing up the Hungarian government by not putting the report on Hungary on the agenda. And everybody has said it, but it's incredibly disappointing. The Romanian presidency is not here. That is unbelievable. It's also the presidency that is delegitimizing the Parliament's candidate for the European Public Prosecutor, and with that actually delegitimizes the whole process. Fighting corruption is crucial in rule of law, and we've got a country that is seriously backsliding and that is chairing the European Council right now. Give me another example. I know January 2011, when the Hungarian government was chair of the Council. That was also half a year that nothing happened. People, we need to be ashamed of this. 6 weeks before the European elections, and we've got this as an example.
Merci.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Mr. Batten for 2 minutes for the ENF. He is not in the chamber, so I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Lenners for 1.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chairman, President. The EU is a union of countries that come together to fight a war and to stand together in strength. But this is only true when this is based on a strong foundation of shared values, and that is a big challenge these days. And we've seen that there has been a lack of reactions from the Commission, and when we look at Poland, they should have been subject to an Article 7 procedure. Then you have a country like Romania and Malta. They don't get very much attention, but you know, we should really be looking at Valletta and Bucharest, and we shouldn't have two standards. We can only champion our union if we have the same standards for all. And you know, this shouldn't be a case of who your friends are in the courts. And in the case of Romania and also in the case of Malta, the European Union should intervene for once and for all. Mr. Nica for 2 minutes and a half.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, yet another electoral debate today. No concrete facts are mentioned in connection to Romania, and once again we are forced to tell the truth and challenge most of the lies that have been said here today. What about the rule of law? If you don't have rights and freedoms for your citizens, you have no rule of law. In 2009, the General Prosecutor of Romania signed the first secret protocol with the intelligence services. Surprisingly, General Prosecutor at the time, Mrs. Kövesi. Over the past 2 years, we've heard a lot about a long series of secret protocols concluded with the secret services, and the Romanian citizens were terrified and horrified to find out about these secret protocols that led to abuse and abominable injustice. Romanians hate double standards. They hate double standards in justice. They hate double standards in everything pertaining to their everyday life. Counterfeit food products that have flooded the market, endangering their health. Pharmaceutical products. Romanians are not members of the Schengen area, even if for years they have been met all requirements. Everywhere, in all airports, you see Romanians queuing apart from the other European citizens. 80% of all Romanians say that this is outrageous, and what has been done in the field of justice is completely unacceptable. We have to put an end to this kind of abuse. And on TV, day in, day out, they heard countless testimonies to that effect, and Romanians are sensitive to the issue because they have been victims of abuse during the communist era, and they don't want to accept that judges are being blackmailed, that prosecutors are being tapped, secretly filmed in their bathrooms, in their bedrooms, so they become vulnerable to blackmail. No, Romanians want to be equal partners, equal citizens of the EU. They reject this discrimination, which is grounded in absolutely nothing and truly undeserved. And we say to all people of good faith, Romania deserves more and Romanians deserve more. Thank you.
Mrs. Weber for 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Romania is within the verification and cooperation mechanism with the European Commission, and Romanian politicians were severely criticized in this mechanism for practices that contravene to justice. And still, some weeks ago, leaders in the European Parliament asked authorities in Romania, also courts, to stop an investigation against a Romanian citizen whose rights had been, and whose procedural rights had been observed. The Superior Council of Magistracy in Romania, which guarantees the independence of justice, declared that these leaders, Antonio Tajani, Manfred Weber, Guy Verhofstadt, through their declarations, they put pressure on national judges who were tackling this case and undermined the independence of justice. So, dear European colleagues, it is time to stop using double standards and start behaving just the way you ask other politicians to behave.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weber. For a minute and a half, Mr. Preda.
Mulțumesc, doamna președintă. Trebuie să spun că
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also very sorry that there's nobody here on behalf of the Romanian government, even if we have a debate devoted precisely to Romania, and they're not here to represent the presidency of the Council. This shows their contempt towards our institution and towards the Council itself. It's indeed most regrettable that with the first Romanian presidency we find ourselves in such a situation. Someone should have been here, because unfortunately the Bucharest regime is no longer a regime associated with the rule of law, because the majority that's been running the country since 2016 are doing exactly what Mr. Nica has been describing. They've been putting pressure on judges, on prosecutors, and they've even created institutions likely to force them to revise decisions once deemed final, to stop prosecuting people for corruption, all in order to save that ridiculous character that leads their party, a man sentenced twice for corruption. Show me another European country where the ruling party has as its leader such a man, a leader who continued to remain in office after being sentenced twice, who's rewarded for theft in the EU. How can we accept this coalition of utterly vile people who want to destroy the country for the sake of that nobody?
Mrs. Grappini, 2 minutes.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Allow me to make an observation. This debate is a failure, Commissioner. We can see this in the number of people present. We're 20 people here, and the most critical leaders are not here. They are cowards. Mr. Weber dared to come to Romania, to my own country, and tell my government to stop a case that was pending before the court. Commissioner, you well know that in the field of justice, you cannot go to a government and tell them to do something, even if you're a European official. And the interventions of European officials have actually affected negatively justice in Romania. Citizens in Romania do not understand why certain officials, certain MEPs want to interfere with cases pending before Romanian courts. Okay, are we in an electoral campaign? Yes, I understand. Mr. Preda was saying that you're also in an electoral campaign, so the EPP is trying to gain something in the campaign. Commissioner, I want you to tell Romanians, you didn't even give one example of breaches against the rule of law, not even one. Romania's government has a successful presidency. Are you sorry that they're successful, that they managed to complete so many files? Why are you doing this? Okay, last year we had a resolution. It was an unfair resolution, and you know that there is something in that resolution that no one would say about any other country. You're blaming Romania for changing the head of an institution. Well, this head of an institution devastated justice. I'm talking about the lives of people, about thousands of court trials that even you said that have to be repeated. So what shall we do? Shall we leave those people in injustice? Who are you protecting? Romania is not Kövesi. Romania is not one person. Romanians are 20 million people. And
Mr. Preda, please. Yeah, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Hökmark for 1 minute.
President, undermining the independence of the judiciary, undermining the independence of prosecutors, hindering new parties to be established, trying to legalize corruption, fighting not corruption but those who fight corruption, getting rid of uncomfortable leaders of independent authorities, prohibiting them to leave the country. Of course, this is a collapse of rule of law. And what worries me maybe most is the denials. But I must say also, Mr. Weidenholzer, the silence from the socialist group is thundering. Your contribution here tonight was not impressive, and I will tell you why. The defense of rule of law and democracy does not follow party colors. The misuse of power in Hungary or in Poland doesn't excuse it in Romania. And I have heard you, all of you, be very vocal, just as I, about Hungary, just as I about Poland. But your silence is thundering. You are misusing your obligation to defend democracy. You as a leader here tonight of the Socialist Group, that is wrong.
I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Sarvamaa for a minute and a half.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Well, where on earth is Vice President Timmermans? Do I see? No. Where is the Romanian presidency? I don't see them either. The European Union was founded in order to prosper peace, democracy, democratic principles and the rule of law. As my EPP colleagues, I am extremely concerned about the state of the rule of law and the recent developments in Romania. We cannot accept the Romanian government's continuous attempts for changes to the Romanian Penal Code through emergency ordinance, which aim at decriminalising corruption progressively. We cannot accept the continuous attempts to interfere with the independence of the judiciary. The special section for investigations, which puts pressure on the judges and prosecutors, has to be stopped. All in all, defending the rule of law and urging the Romanian government to stop acting against the core values of the European Union should be considered as top priorities for all of us. And by the way, I would advise Madam in 't Veld to take a closer look at the decision EPP made in Brussels on March 20th. I don't think your comments serve full justice to that decision. Thank you.
Mr. Bostinaro, just a moment. Mr. Bostinaro, wait a moment. You asked for a point of order. This will be exclusively a point of order, no comment.
Vreau să reamintesc colegilor de la PPE.
I would like to remind my colleagues in the EPP, maybe they were not here, there was a decision made. The decision for the Council not to be present is a decision taken by the Council of Presidents. Ask your group leader. Ask them what happened with your proposals before accusing the Romanian government.
Now, you invoke this, but it's not the part of the rules of procedure. Next speaker, please.
Doamna președintă, stimată doamnă.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner, distinguished colleagues, Romania is a pro-European country. The Romanian people has embraced European values. They want justice, they want freedom, they want rule of law. For the past 2 years, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets to defend European values, and politicians have the obligation to listen to what the people are saying, and politicians are never allowed to change the law in their own interest. Once again, millions of decent Romanians don't want amnesty, don't want pardons. So I ask the Romanian government to take into account and implement all the recommendations made by independent experts, the Venice Commission, the European Commission, under the MCV. The Romanian government has to listen to what the people are saying, and this is why President Iohannis on May 22nd has decided to hold a referendum giving the opportunity to Romanian citizens to express their wishes in connection to what's happened in the justice system. They can say no to amnesty, they can say no to pardons, and they can say no to overnight changes to criminal law. Criminal law has to be changed by taking into account the opinions of magistrates, of NGOs, and by taking into account recommendations made by our foreign partners. I ask the Romanian Commission to support the Romanian people in their struggle for justice and European values. Thank you.
Madame Grappini, vous acceptez?
There is a blue card from Mrs. Grappini. Will you accept?
Vă mulțumesc.
Thank you. Distinguished colleague, I have a concrete question. You said that laws were changed overnight. Can you mention a single law, except for the one that Mr. Cioloș mentioned overnight when Mrs. Brunner was minister? Do you know of any other law that was changed overnight? Thank you, Mrs. Grappini, for your question. There's a long series of emergency ordinances issued by the past three Romanian governments. The first in late January 2017, Emergency Ordinance 13. The next day, hundreds of thousands of people were in the street protesting against this attempt to put an end to anti-corruption struggle.
Vous avez terminé?
Are you finished, sir? Yes? Okay, we now move on to Catch the Eye. Mrs. Jourová has the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Először is szeretnék
First of all, I will
the Romanians, and I know what is it to be in your shoes being a Hungarian, but I have to say that this speech is against double standard, and I have to say that Madam Gressler has reconsidered many of the accusations that time against Hungary also. This time against Romania, many times it comes to light how come Romania came far when it comes to the integration of the poorest people. Today there is a crisis situation all around Europe with people being sent out of their settlements because EU money is very slowly coming to these places of Europe. So I would like to ask the Romanian presidency to put shoulders together with the Council, with the Commission, several commissioners, among them Madam Crețu, to make sure that the unused money in the structural funds will be very quickly used to help those citizens of Europe who are not receiving the EU money being spent on them because there are difficulties in the bureaucracy. Therefore they will be evicted, so please let's stop eviction all around in the Roma settlements around Europe, also in Târgu Mureș. Thank you.
You must resume, sum up, please. Mr. Christian.
Vă mulțumesc, doamnă președintă.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, your silence in front of abuse in Romania is thundering, someone said. I want to tell you very clearly, the objective of my party is that of consolidating the European project and eliminating double standards that you tolerate. Populism and extremism threaten the European project, and they come from the fact that European officials are separated, completely separated from the reality of the European capitals. In front of the attitude of the Commission to Romania and to the MCV, Romania's reputation and the Commission's reputation are gravely affected. The Commission is trying to interfere into Romanian internal issues such as trials. That is unacceptable. Some of you will be in the next Commission, and I ask you to stop interfering with trials in member states. You are ready to use us just so as to earn a few percentages in your electoral campaign. I will...
Please conclude, sir. I'm terribly sorry. Catch the Eye is 1 minute speaking time. Please respect your speaking time. Mr. Jurek is next.
Panie I panowie posłowie, pani komisarz Jourová powiedziała, że jeżeli sytuacja w...
Thank you very much, Madam. Commissioner Jourová said that if the situation in Romania doesn't change, then the Commission will take the necessary steps. Well, happily, this Commission won't be taking any more steps. They've taken enough detrimental steps already, and now it's up to the electorate, of course. Now, Mr. Timmermans, I understand, is used to this kind of thing. Now, what's going on in Romania is really very difficult. It's as complex a situation as the situation the UK finds itself in at the moment. And I can understand when they're talking about corruption. Of course, all kinds of corruption, regardless of how small the case may be, is bad for all of us. However, we are looking at surveillance of politicians and citizens here, and that simply can't go on. This is a problem, and it's the Romanians that have to resolve it.
Mrs. Nicolai, the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, to hold a debate about the rule of law, centerpiece of the EU, and then not show up for it, it means that you either despise the debate and the rule of law, and what you do is pure demagoguery, or you think that this is a debate that causes you to lose face. I don't know if we are losing face, but this whole debate is completely devoid of substance. It's a rerun of a Spielberg movie when someone was sentenced for what he believed. That's what you did today, Commissioner. Had you had the minimum decency to see what actually happened in Romania, would have seen that no laws were passed, and we are criticized for passing laws. But I understand that people want votes, I understand that people want to remain in their positions and so on, but you have to understand that this type of behavior creates a gap between citizens and European institutions. And this is why we should dispense with populism and electoral messages.
De catch the eye et tout le monde aura la parole. Madame Morvai.
I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Morvai.
Thank you very much. In response to Commissioner Jourová, I have a specific question. Are you aware, Madam Jourová, do you know Zoltán Szőcs and István Beke from Romania who are facing criminal proceedings? This is a good example. Politics is trying to exert pressure on criminal justice, and we relive the most horrendous Bolshevik times when they joined forces with the Secret Service, and politicians use imprisonment, use other criminal means to achieve their political objectives. In the case of these two citizens, we have a window procedure to criminalize two people who have been doing nothing else than fighting for the human rights of the Hungarian minority in Romania, and therefore Romania considers them enemies. Are you aware of this issue?
Okay, you must conclude. Mr. Popa.
Monsieur Popa.
Mr. Popa.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Unfortunately, again, this is not a debate. It is just a festival for electoral mottos, and just like the people who initiated this debate wanted it to be. There's nothing concrete. There's no substance in this debate. And you actually said, we don't want to go into concrete details. Actually, no one wants to go into concrete details. We just want to talk about fears and worries and risks. Well, Commissioner, we should be worried, and we should talk about risks when high European officials from here, from Strasbourg, tell magistrates in Romania what to do. This is unacceptable. Rule of law means letting justice do its job and not dictating it, no matter who you are. We shouldn't tell justice what to do. Thank you.
Mrs. Tapadell.
Frumos, doamna președintă, doamna comisar.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I'll start with a question. When we talk about the rule of law, do we talk about respecting the rights and freedoms of our citizens? Because that's what we're talking about. This is what the Romanian government is trying to do today. They want a justice system that's fair, where citizen rights are respected, where there are no circuit protocols, where there are no abuse coming from prosecutors, where lives and careers are no longer destroyed. Hence my message to all political forces in Parliament who are using Romania as a slogan in their electoral campaign. You are voted because you're credible in the eyes of your voters. It's unacceptable now at a time of electoral campaign to have yet another debate attacking the internal politics of a member state. It's a double standard at the level of the institution, and this is utterly unacceptable. What happens here is a purely electoral game, damaging the credibility of the European Parliament.
Monsieur Diacono.
Mr. Diacono.
Merci. Mi-e greu să înțeleg.
Thank you. It's difficult for me to understand how we can talk about something, the rule of law, even though that something is not clearly defined. As long as criminal policy is a national competence and there are huge differences between the justice systems of the member states, it is impossible to make an assessment. And this is why I have to say this is just noise. Everything being said today, it's just noise, nothing more. This is a national Romanian competence. I also expect the Romanian justice system and the European Parliament to set their rules, of course based on European principles. But further than that, I have to say, we do not have rule of law in Romania, unfortunately. We still have a lot of work to do to get there, but I am expecting the next Parliament to define the rule of law and to put it into practice.
Doamna.
Luana.
Doamnă comisar, dragi colegi.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, Romania is my country, and for as long as I'm here as its representative in the Romanian Parliament, I'll never allow anybody to circulate lies in connection to it. There is rule of law in Romania, and I repeat, there is rule of law in Romania. Certain Romanian political parties are trying to present a completely different picture in the public space. It's the electoral interests of the opposition parties, it's the interests of certain European parties, and as a consequence, the image of the Romanian justice system is utterly distorted. Those who blame Romania are the same people who, in their own country, are putting pressure on the justice systems, trying to force sentencing, even in the absence of evidence of certain politicians, or, on the contrary, are putting pressure on the justice systems to spare certain people associated with their circles of interest. When the members of the Romanian opposition identify certain elements that they find debatable from a legal point of view, they should first and foremost put an end to the pressure they are putting on the justice system. What you see and hear today is certainly, and the chair stops to speak.
Mrs. Gomes.
2004, I voted here in this parliament for Romania to join the EU and fought those who wanted to keep Romania out and under ransom because of the moratorium on the international adoption of children. I backed all those in Romania who fought the immoral and corrupt business of exporting Romanian children. Most were from PSD. 15 years later, I'm appalled that the EU is under a Romanian presidency who does not even bother to be here today, which is captured by a PSD leader, Liviu Dragnea, whom Olaf identifies as having created a criminal organization to steal millions in EU funds. as a socialist, I have higher demands from my own political family. And that is why I have not been shy in criticizing what's going on in Romania. And I'm relieved to see that finally my group has had the courage to suspend the Romanian PSD while this criminal capture persists. As Commissioner Jourová said, this is about, indeed, the rule of law, not only in Romania, but in the EU. And if we want to back all these brave Romanian citizens who braved the harsh winter, demanding, indeed, the rule of law, we have to back them in the fight against corruption.
Mr. Lopez Aguilar, to sum up.
Presidenta, Comisar.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner Jourová, I'm speaking on behalf of the Socialists on the situation in Romania, but, you know, of course, the debate on the fight against corruption, the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights, it has been subverted into a debate where there are cross-accusations vis-a-vis those countries that were subject to Article 7 for violating Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, and other countries where there have not been constitutional reforms that line up with those principles. But there's a lot of work that remains to be done. We need a solid mechanism for verification, for fulfillment of Article 2 of the TEU, the rule of law, fundamental rights, democracy, and fight against corruption. Now, this mechanism, Mrs. Jourová, is up to the Commission based on the resolution that we adopted in the Parliament. This is something that should come to play after the elections. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to Commissioner Jourová.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, honourable members. First, let me express the conviction that I represent here the whole college, the whole Commission. So that's the reaction on you who criticised the first Vice President Timmermans not being here today. Frans Timmermans has engaged very intensively in continuous, long-lasting dialogue with the Romanian authorities, and he is the last one who should be criticised for doing something wrong or something negative against Romania. The second comment, the Commission does not interfere in the individual cases in Romania. This is the reaction on Madam Grappini. This is our principle. We do not interfere, and we are looking at systemic situation, at the situation in the legislation, and that's why we are addressing the recent legislative changes which we see in Romania, because the cumulative potential of the individual changes might lead to the breach of rule of law in Romania. Last comment, no, Madam Morvai, I don't know the cases. I very well remember my own case from 2006. I was accused of corruption in 2006 within a very dirty political case. It was purely motivated by political interests, and it was the charade for media. And I still remember, when sitting in the jail, not for a single second I believed that any judge in my country will send me to jail after indictment at the court. I believed in independent justice in my country. And by the way, the court never got to the court because there was no slightest evidence. It was just politically initiated, dirty game for the media. I remember it very well. And it's a paradox that Romania was the country which offered me the work after this, because everything was destroyed by this. I will not go into details, but also it affected horribly my family. And I worked in Romania. This country gave me a chance to provide my knowledge and expertise, and that's why I should be the last person who could be accused now of doing something against Romania. I just have to share the view that in Romania we might get into the situation of irreversible changes of the judiciary system, the systemic breach of rule of law, where the independence and impartiality of judiciary is endangered. I was following closely what Romania is doing through the CVM exercise. I was happy about the reform going in the right direction, and at the same time I was very scared about the changes which started to go in a very wrong direction, and this is where we are now. The independent judiciary is the very important pillar of the democratic state, and it is something which is being developed over decades. In all the member states we saw a very long process which led to the well-balanced constitutional system with a very strong independent judiciary as the main part of it, or one of the main parts. But it can be destroyed literally overnight, and this is what the Commission doesn't want to happen in Romania. So again, the debate, the dialogue is ongoing. I agree with those of you who said that the Romanians deserve more, so we would like to help Romania. Now the debate is ongoing on technical level. I would wish us to come back to the political level and have a positive dialogue which will lead to the positive changes and the reform coming back on the track in Romania. Thank you very much.
Merci. Non, Monsieur Pavel.
Mr. Pavel, I'm terribly sorry. Mr. Pavel, I did not give you the floor. You arrived at the very last minute. You cannot present a blue card for Mrs. Jourova's intervention unless you have a... Please don't speak without the microphone. It's useless. I'm terribly sorry. You should have arrived just a bit earlier to this debate, which is now closed. And so now we will completely change the subject because the agenda calls for a different discussion on the collective investment of funds with the Klins report on cross-border distribution of collective investment.